Okie dokie, everybody. We are live. Good morning. Good morning. Happy Wednesday. You've made it halfway through the week. Today is Mercury's Day, and we actually have quite a few fun aspects involving Mercury and our Gemini moon today, so make sure to check the daily posts that I do. We're having some fun screen share action on Facebook this morning. But anyway, so we are here for the Astro-Babble. We are here to read 5 more charts that have been donated by you, my lovely followers. Just as a reminder, if you would like to be on the live stream, you can always private message me your birth date, birthplace, exact birth time. You can also submit your friends and family, always with their consent. Always with their consent. Good morning, Aliana, everybody who's jumping on Facebook and Instagram. I appreciate you. Yeah, and then also if you would like to learn astrology or if you would like to schedule a private consult, you can always go to my website, scorpiorisingastrology.com. Also, just a quick plug, I dropped a new class this morning, my Planetary Altars class, which is really big when I work with clients as well as students on remediating the birth chart. I talk about it sometimes in the live stream, so I'm doing a class on it because I've gotten multiple requests for it. So that's now live and will be October 25th of 2020 if y'all are watching the recording from 6 to 8, and the event is live on the Facebook. If you're watching this after that, then the recording of the class will be available for purchase on my website at scorpiorisingastrology.com. Anyway, let's go ahead and let's get to the charts. Let's get to the charts, everybody. Okay. Let's talk about Katiana. My dear, how are you? Good morning. Cheers. Okay. So here's where we're going to start. We're going to start with the Scorpio ascendant, because we not only have Scorpio on the ascendant, we also have Pluto retrograde in Scorpio, as well as the South Node in Scorpio in the first house of self. This does bring forward a lot of Scorpio energy. And when we talk about Scorpio, we talk about the fixed water sign of the zodiac. So we're talking about water that is often frozen, yeah, or underneath the surface. It's kind of like it's the lakes underneath the ocean. It's the water within water type stuff, and that's kind of like the underworld energy of Scorpio. The darker aspect of Scorpio, the more occulty, literal occult, meaning to be visually hidden aspect of Scorpio. But Scorpio only hides itself or kind of goes below the surface because it is so sensitive, because it needs to be defensive, because it is so perceptive and intuitive. So that's a big part of the personality. Although you're used to thinking of yourself as an Aquarius, you have a very, very strong Scorpio energy in the chart, as well as your moon in Aries, which is, they're both the Mars-ruled signs. Lots of stuff there to unpack for sure. So let's start off with that, the idea of Scorpio being very heavy in the chart. Let's zip over to that moon in Aries in the 6th house, because this is why you have that workaholic tendency and why you derive so much emotional satisfaction through work. Also, we have to respect that the 6th house is work, health, and pets. So the idea of you being involved in healing, as well as your own healing, as well as working with animals, and or surrounding yourself with furry friends, or feathered friends, or scaly friends, or any type of pet that you're gravitated towards. But I have to warn you that Moon in Aries in the 6th with pets tend to like pets who are not just loving and adorable, but who are also fiercely protective. So that's kind of another thing. Wouldn't surprise me if you had some big ass dog or some poisonous reptile or something like that. Anyway. But the moon in Aries overall, it really does bring that Aries quality, that kind of cardinal fire, that leadership quality into the heart space of the moon, and you transfer that to the 6th house of work, health, pets, which is where we get that kind of workaholic tendency. Now, because your ascendant is in Scorpio and your moon is in Aries, these two aspects of self are very, very important because they're both the Mars-ruled signs. So when we look to the ruler of your chart, being Mars, who is also ruling your moon, this is a very, very important aspect for us to understand. And you've decided to put Mars in Sagittarius in the 2nd house of finance. So it wouldn't surprise me if you actually worked in the financial sphere, or if you were very good with money. But also the fact that you identify very strongly with 2nd house topics like wealth, like material possessions, like just the idea of personal wealth and value too. Sorry, getting a little bit of Velcro to play with. Yeah, so that's where we see Mars. Mars being in the second house does bring a very kind of monetary and wealth-centric feel to the chart, because both the first house of self and the sixth house of work are ruled by this Mars in the second house of finance. We also have Saturn here in Sagittarius, which makes it interesting, as well as Uranus here in Sagittarius. You know, these two planets are not necessarily known for their kindness, but Saturn is actually really good with finance after 30. So after year 30, when you hit that first Saturn return, it'll really start to hit home with finance, and you'll actually really start to bring forward a lot of the Saturnian gifts once that placement kind of matures. We do also have Uranus and Sagittarius, which does potentially, especially earlier in life, lead to overspending paired with that Mars and Sagittarius. So as you master your own money, it makes sense that you'll learn how to master money for others. But there is also this really strong creative side to you. We have Venus in Pisces, which is a very fertile sign and planet to have in the fifth house of children. But we also have Mercury in Pisces here in the fifth house as well, which is a pretty detrimented Mercury. A Mercury we would definitely need to remediate if you find yourself experiencing communication issues, if you find yourself experiencing kind of entrepreneurial issues, tax issues, business issues. Let's see, and where is Virgo in the chart, as well as friendship issues, because Mercury rules all of those aspects of your chart, and he's not doing too well. We would want to make sure that that Mercury is taken care of. But you do have an exalted Venus, which is great, and I definitely think that that makes up for a little bit of the chaos of that Mercury. Venus in Pisces in the fifth house is just such an overly abundant placement. You know, when I think of Venus in Pisces, it's the holy grail that runneth over, with kind of the lifeblood, the life energy of just creativity. And to have that in your house of creativity is massively beneficial for you. So I enjoy that. I enjoy that very much. And a lot of your creative impulses and a lot of your creative inspiration will be drawn from family, because we have Jupiter in Aquarius, as well as the Sun in Aquarius in the fourth house of family, Jupiter ruling your Pisces house. So that's where we find a lot of the inspiration, is having like a home studio and letting your family get involved in your artwork and or painting your family, or in some way, shape, or form allowing the creativity to flow around the parenting dynamic that's present within the chart itself. Having the Sun in Aquarius in the fourth house for you is an interesting dynamic with a Scorpio ascendant. And I say interesting dynamic because of this. So a Sun in Aquarius, a Sun in the fourth house, period, yeah, indicates that the ego is very attached to the family dynamic. And that's not necessarily a great thing, because it derives a lot of self-esteem from the family dynamic, and Scorpio as a whole tends to shy away from family dynamics because it's a rather hidden and personal sign. So we have that kind of push-pull, that give-take that's present a little bit. So we might need to work with that, understanding that you don't necessarily need to be present at every family function in order to derive satisfaction from that placement planetarily, but you do need to be involved in some way, shape, or form in order to make sure your ego is kind of attached to the idea of your family's wellness. A large portion of your life will actually be dedicated towards the idea of finding a mate and finding an ideal partner, because we have the North Node in Taurus, ruled by that exalted Venus in the fifth house of, in addition to children and family and creativity, of sexuality as well. So there's a very Venusian slant to your life, a very Venusian slant to your relationships, which I enjoy. You know, it really partners that second house of finance, that kind of rational, physical house, with that kind of subtle, less tangible kind of internal realm that the fifth house and the seventh house bring forward. So we pair the workaholism and the secretive kind of weird family dynamics with this beautiful kind of search for spouse and search for partnership and search for kinship and connection with somebody who you can truly hold dear for long stints of time. Yeah. I think that's pretty much the summary of your chart, my dear. That went pretty fast. So thank you, Katiana, for donating your chart. very, very much. I appreciate it. Let's go ahead and we'll take a peek at, oh, there's my email. Good morning, Melanie. Everybody who's jumping on, I see Katara, who jumped on Instagram, and we are actually just about to get to Katara's chart. I saw your name and I immediately thought of Katara from Avatar: The Last Airbender, and now I have the tequila version of Katara stuck in my head, where it's like da da na 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 da 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 na da na da na da Katara, and sorry, being super nerdy. Anyway, so my dear, my darling, how are you? Good morning. Let's take a peek at your chart, shall we? So we have an Aquarius ascendant. Interesting. Interesting. A new moon in the chart. Exalted Mercury. Some fascinating relationship stuff. Oh, that's so funny. So cute. Okay, so let's unpack the chart. So we have an Aquarius ascendant, which naturally makes you blessed by this kind of fixed air energy. We also have Uranus in Aquarius retrograde, who is the secondary ruler of Aquarius in the first house. 0 degrees, like right at the edge, but you got him. You got the blessings of Uranus. So when we talk about Aquarius, we talk about the genius archetype. We talk about that Albert Einstein energy, which is very intellectual, but often very aloof, hard for humans to understand, which is why Aquarius is often thought of as like an alien sign. But Aquarius, just like any of the other signs, has strengths and weaknesses. Its strength is going to be its intellect, its perception, its ability to kind of lightning rod inspiration and ideas from the heavens and from the divine. But the downside of Aquarius is, at its worst, it's kind of above it all and hard to ground. Yeah. And with Uranus here, we also have kind of a double dose of that unpredictable kind of lightning Zeus energy, that exalted on high, top of the tower, Rapunzel-ish retreating that does tend to come with Aquarius. And you thought you were just a Virgo. Not to say that you're not a really strong Virgo, but we have some major stuff to discuss that is not necessarily Virgo oriented. So the ruler of your chart is going to be Saturn in Aries retrograde in the 3rd. Public speaking might be a very strong issue in your chart, to tell you the truth. But one of the things that you're here to kind of tackle is this idea of higher education and learning and scholastic pursuits. So although public speaking and writing and teaching and communication might be a really terrible issue that develops later in life, it is something that you will constantly need to come back to. So the ruler of your chart is Saturn, but Saturn is in Aries, the sign of his detriment. So it's his least favorite sign. Saturn prefers to be cool and calm and collected, to be wise, to be strategic. And in the impulsive sign of Aries, it really just doesn't match his vibe. And he's also retrograde. He's also going backwards. He's at the slowest point of his cycle. So it's a very weak Saturn that's ruling your chart from the 3rd house of writing, teaching, communication, which is where we get this idea of a Saturn that is misplaced, that might lead to speech impediments, learning disabilities or difficulties, and difficulty in the scholastic setting in general. But your North Node is also in the 9th house of higher learning, travel, foreigners, spirituality. Like, you're here to learn, you're here to grow. So although we might have some learning issues, some speaking issues, some teacher or teaching issues, we're going to need to learn how to overcome that. And this is where Saturn remediation really comes forward. And that would be a definite practice that I would encourage you to work on. I just dropped a planetary altars class, which I'll be doing on October 25th. Would love to see you there. I think that would be really helpful. But in general, if you just wanted to look up planetary remediation and start building your relationship with Saturn, that would help to really calm a lot of the stress around your higher and lower learning houses in the chart. Okay, now that we've tackled Lord of the Chart stuff, we need to, oh goodness, and that Jupiter. Oops, I'm getting distracted. That Jupiter in Capricorn. Crap, darling. Crap. You're just hitting a really rough patch financially. Um, it has not been easy for the past year and a half, has it? So the reason why I say that, and it's getting better because Jupiter went direct, Saturn went direct, Pluto went direct, but you have Jupiter natally in Capricorn, which is also the sign of his detriment, opposing his exaltation in Cancer. So Jupiter in the 12th, no less, ruling your second house of finance, like that's some serious money issue, and we need to be very, very close and aware of your drama, your trauma with money, and your idea of understanding what not only your personal value is, and that your personal value is not attached to dollar bills, but then also understanding that, like, yes, money is a necessary force, currency in this world that needs to be mastered and understood. Which is where I think your entrepreneurial placements come forward, and this is where we start to get into the ease of the chart. And I really do enjoy us talking about the Virgo placements from here on. So we have a new moon in Virgo in the 8th house of business, which I enjoy. I enjoy this very much. Putting the sun in the 8th house as well as the moon naturally aligns you with the 8th house topics on a personal level. That includes business, that includes taxes, that includes other people's money, not necessarily your own money, which we would need to remediate, but other people's money, being a very good business person in general. Virgo is also a great business sign, in general. And you have Mercury in Virgo, who is exalted. He is retrograde, but he is exalted. So he does give you favor in that department, which I think is very helpful. And one of the other things that I like about this, normally we have to be wary about new moons in a chart, because what new moons will do in a chart is they will hide the emotions, not just from other people, but also from the native, also from the people person whose chart we're talking about. So that new moon, that tendency for the moon to be hidden, yeah, also eclipses the emotions, and starts to detach from emotional wellness. So we may need to induce emotional vomiting on occasion and get you in touch with your kind of feely side, because you already have Aquarius on the ascendant with Uranus, who's already not prone to feeling, ruled by Mars and Aries, who's does zero feelings, and then you've hidden your moon. Like, where is your emotional intelligence, my dear? Where is it? Where is that lunar connection? We might need to work with that as well. Also, Venus is in Leo, a fire sign. Like, all of your yin is compromised. But in this case, in terms of business, like, we really don't like watery emotions getting in the way of business stuff. We prefer practicality. We prefer rules. We prefer spreadsheets. We prefer data. We prefer numbers in this case. And so having a new moon in Virgo ruled by Mercury in Virgo, although retrograde, still Mercury in Virgo in the 8th house of business, I like it. I like it a lot. I think that that's beautiful. I think that that entrepreneurial flair, I think that that business, that tax, that managing other people's money flair is actually very, very good for you. And it would not surprise me if you actually worked in the financial sector as well, and or just constantly was starting side businesses, because there is this kind of impulse to dive into that world. We also have a strong affiliation with death in the 8th house, so mediumship abilities with Mercury being so present and exalted is always a possibility as well. Ooh, a famous spouse, really? That's fun. So we have a couple interesting dynamics in the 7th house of relationships. We have Mars in Leo and Venus in Leo co-present in the 7th house of relationships. Whenever we see both yin and yang planets, masculine and feminine planets in the 7th house, there's always going to be a certain amount of gender identity that comes forward in the chart. There's always going to be a questioning of sexuality that comes forward in the chart. The idea of both the masculine and the feminine principles somewhat being fused together and not necessarily being as separate or cut or clear or dry, because especially both being in Leo, like, attention is attention. It doesn't really matter, if you're dressed one way or act a certain way. Attention is attention, from that perspective. And And one of the reasons why I say a famous spouse is because we have Mars here ruling the 10th house. And ruling your third house, which I think is good. Somebody in your community who's a little bit more well known, who's a little bit more recognized, somebody who's very, very good at what they do, who's recognized via status in their field, you'll naturally be attracted to them. Their status, their influence, their affluence, it'll just be a very, very good thing for you. There is the idea that early on, especially as things mature, there may be the early death of a spouse as well, because Mars is being ruled by the sun in the 8th house of death, but also entrepreneurship. And again, when we look at the different possible meanings of that, the 8th house as a house of business, putting Mars together with that, you could also potentially go into business with a spouse. So there are many traditional interpretations of that dynamic. Venus, however, being so close to Mars and in a masculine sign, ruling your 4th house of family and your 9th house of travel, foreigners, higher education. I think that there is this idea of overperforming, of overdoing, of constantly being on the go, of not sitting still, of being very, very restless. And a lot of that has to do with you viewing practical things like food as the enemy. Like if you're in a creative rush, if you're in a work burst, like the last thing that you want to do is derail your energy and go eat something. But that's actually something that you need to do on a regular basis, as a human. So we need to just kind of be aware that Venus is slightly compromised. But Venus and Leo in the 7th house of love, like you're a sucker for anything classically romantic, any broad sweeping gestures of romance and charisma will just sweep you off your feet in the most classical of terms. You're also looking for somebody who you can actually form a foundation with, not just in a life perspective, but also in the perspective of starting potentially a business or a partnership in that way as well. Cool. Okay. Excellent. So face your fears with public speaking, embrace the writing teaching dynamic, love your business aspect, manage your own personal finances, and just go completely ham on relationships. That's my 2 cents. Okie dokie. Good morning, Melanie. Good morning, Katiana. Good morning, Liz. Good morning, everybody on Instagram. Good morning, Copper Moon Arts, Nerdovision, Brother Lightheart. So good to see everybody. Thank you for joining me on the live stream this Wednesday. So glad you loved it, Katara. God, that song is just in my head. I guess your grandma is coming through, or your mom, the one who did the salsa dancing. That's hilarious because I literally cannot get the tequila song with your name out of my head. So funny. And that will often happen during sessions. And sometimes clients will ask me, do you do intuitive work? Do you do mediumship? Do you do psychic work? And I say there's really no way to separate it. The information that comes through. It's not necessarily something that you can plan for. But I can tell you that there have been many, many sessions where I literally just have to say, okay, we need to stop for 2 seconds because I can't focus because your people are coming through and we need to have a conversation that's not necessarily astrology focused. Okay, so anyway, back to Mara. Let's take a peek at Mara's chart. Well. Okay, Mara. So let's take a peek at your chart, shall we? We have a Cancer ascendant, so we naturally have that stamp of motherhood. We have that very compassionate, very empathetic, very caretaker energy, also very mama bear protective energy coming forward. That's blessed your chart with Cancer on the ascendant. That also makes the moon the ruler of your chart. And here in your chart, we have the moon in Sagittarius in the 6th house of work, health, and pets. But we also have an interesting formation. We have both Saturn and Uranus at 27 degrees completely conjoined in the 6th house as well. This makes a very interesting dynamic for your work, health, and pets house. When Whenever we see the moon in the 6th house, it's often somebody who derives a lot of satisfaction from their work. It's somebody who tends to be very emotionally productive, also who tends to be very, very emotionally attached to their furry friends or feathered friends or scaly friends. We've already had one chart with the moon in the 6th already this morning, so that's a theme. But Saturn, the planet of restriction, and Uranus, the planet of unpredictability, both in the mutable fire sign of Sagittarius, kind of create this natural disaster landslide, which I think you're naturally capable of not just managing, but also surfing and writing. So if there was anything that I could kind of give you in terms of perspective, in your work environment, you're used to and kind of seek out emotionally a certain level of drama, a certain level of natural disaster-ness. Yeah. And it's your job to kind of manage that natural disaster territory. It's your job to swoop in and to find the trauma and to emotionally connect with it, but also have your mutable boundaries in place and to expect the chaos, but also to embrace the solution to the chaos, right? And I think that that's a beautiful way that you work, is by relating to just enough of a degree with the trauma, with the drama, with the chaos through that moon in Sagittarius, which is kind of at its worst all over the place and very foolish. At its best, it's extremely inspired and very bardic, and very communicative and yeah, inspired would probably just be the best word for it. So with all these dynamics taking place in your 6th house of work, it's very interesting to me that you've chosen the path that you've chosen. Because again, without a certain level of excitement, without a certain level of drama, without a certain ability for you to come in and put out the fire, yeah, you're going to lose interest really quick. So we have Sun in Libra as well as Mercury in Libra retrograde in the 4th house of family, being ruled by a detrimented Venus, and this is tricky. This is tricky, Mara. This is family drama and trauma, which surrounds a lot around body image issues, surrounds a lot around scholastic performance, surrounds a lot with language, yeah, and being eloquent. Because Mercury and Venus are in mutual reception, Venus is also in the sign of her detriment, her least favorite sign. Mercury is also retrograde, so these two planets are kind of commiserating, would be a good way to say it. They're trading spaces, which indicates that the 3rd house of writing, teaching, communication, and the 4th house of family and home are going to be not necessarily as peaceful as we would like them to be. Normally, with a Sun in Libra, we would ask there to be a certain level of peace, a certain level of sanity, a certain level of justice to be present. But instead, there was a very heavy leaning. There was a very heavy expectation. You know, Venus in Virgo, where she is actually right now in the skies at the time of this live stream, is what I like to call the Barbie doll. And Venus in Virgo, Venus, who is naturally supposed to be curvy and luscious and raw and unconditional with her love, when she is placed in the rule-oriented and boundary-oriented and resource and management-oriented sign of Virgo, she loses a lot of her Venusian qualities. She puts her hair up. She puts on tight clothes. She starts to change her figure for the appearance and the pleasing of others. And trading that with Mercury, the literal planet of the mind, the planet of communication in the 4th house of family, we can see how scholastic and family expectations really started to warp the mind, really started to warp the self-image, really started to make you feel like you needed to perform at a certain level. And I think that needs to be made peace with in order for you to actually succeed within the life and jump towards this North Node in Pisces, which is really about studying how to break a lot of those patterns. The more I look at your chart, the more I'm really seeing psychiatry, the more I'm really seeing trauma work, the more I'm really seeing death work, the more I'm really seeing healthcare, the more I'm really seeing being a guide from a medical aspect. because Jupiter is in the 12th house of hidden enemies, hospitalizations, jails, retreats, karmic healing, and is ruling both the 9th house of higher learning and spirituality and the 6th house of work. There's a lot to unpack in your process, but I think your process is unique because it molded you kind of like a Barbie doll. It shaped your plasticness. And that's not to say that you are plastic. You could have broken those patterns a long time ago, but the imprint, of that needing to be performing at a certain level and needing to control the chaos of your life, which is what's translated into your personal work environment, and then will help you to understand how to manage those kind of overproductive OCD, constantly attending to details that are not relevant in a emotionally charged situation. I think all of these things just need to be, these threads need to be synchronized, and these threads need to be pulled together, because there is a commonality between all of these kind of life path wiggles and wobbles. Plus the Cancer on the ascendant gives you the ability to hold space for people who are in that process. So all of this kind of put together really does steer me in the direction of a therapeutic modality of some kind, where we're actually investigating some of these patterns. We're really starting to take things slow, take things steady, but unpack and unweave and unravel a lot of the drama, the trauma, the fires that need to be put out, and the landscape that literally needs to be reshaped throughout the life. A spouse will normally come along who works in the same field, because Saturn is ruling the 7th house of relationships from the 6th house of work. So that's fun. And then we have this Mars and Aries retrograde in the 10th house. You're actually getting quite a bit of notoriety at this point, although not all press is good press, but still, they say even bad press is good press. Having some relationship difficulties right now due to the Capricorn transits, like that's all par for the course. It's just kind of happening right now. But as things clear up on December 19th, the fame aspect will actually start to become very, very helpful, very, very resourceful. You'll start to get a lot more notoriety, and work will start to pick up from that dynamic. Okay. Thank you, Mara, for donating your chart to science. I very, very much appreciate it. Let's go ahead and let's continue to move on to our 4th chart in the live stream. We have Samantha. Samantha, my dear, how are you? Let's take a peek at your chart, shall we? Hmm. Okay. Okay. I see it. I see it. I see the plan, Samantha. I see the plan. So we have an ascendant in Aries, which naturally blesses you with the qualities of that cardinal fire sign. It'll also be very important when we look at the Lord of your chart. So having Aries on the ascendant really does bring forward that leadership quality. It does bring forward that impulsiveness, that need to to act first and ask questions later. It does bring forward slight recklessness. It does bring forward a lot of that heat, that fire, that initiatory quality. And where do we find the Lord of the chart? We find Mars in Taurus in the 2nd house of finance. This is excellent. I love this. Putting Mars in the 2nd house of finance, especially in the Earth sign of Taurus, does temper that Mars. It brings that fiery heat and it puts it in a fixed Earth sign to contain it, to make sure that it is channeled appropriately. As well as Mars is also ruling the 8th house of business and taxes. There's a lot of really good detail-oriented finance stuff in the chart, and I'm totally here for it. I love it, actually. I love your financial shrewdness. I love your ability to think of things in terms of wealth and value and resources. I just absolutely adore it. There's so much good financial chemistry in this chart. It's ridiculous. Um, and part of that is because of the exalted Mercury and the Moon in Virgo in the sixth house of business, or sixth house of work, health, and pets. Um, Mercury in Virgo in his exaltation is not just a quick mind, but especially in the sixth house of work, is a very detail oriented, task oriented, managerial formation. It's somebody who can literally walk into any situation and make it more efficient, which I love. I absolutely adore that. Moon in Virgo as well. It's a little bit too antisocial. There's not as much water in the chart as I would like. We need to get a little bit more water into this chart. We need to get you a little bit more in touch with your emotions. But at the same time, good for business. It's good for business. So I think that's part of the appeal, part of the dynamic. Um, hmm. The moon is at 5 degrees, making applying to an exact trine with Uranus and in Capricorn retrograde in the 10th house of fame. It would not surprise me if the clients that you work with are actually very high profile. Um, Fame is definitely a part of the chart. It will become more present as you continue your life. Once you hit that first Saturn return at 30, once you hit that second Saturn return, it will be even more present. That 10th house of fame starting to light up with that exact moon trine from Virgo in the 6th. I love that. We have a very abundant and very active and very productive fifth house of children, parenting, creativity, and sexuality. We have Jupiter at 0 degrees of Leo, South Node in Leo, Venus in Leo, as well as the Sun in Leo in the sign of his rulership in the fifth house of creativity, parenting, children, and sexuality. So that house is pretty packed. It's pretty active. There's a lot of stuff going on there, especially with the ascendant loosely separating, but still trining Venus by degree, less than a degree from that trine. So I think that that's flawless. I think your identification with being a mother and being a parent, as well as just really tapping into the creative juices that Leo will bring forward. I like that combination of Leo and Virgo. Actually, it allows you to be about the numbers, it allows you to be about the data, it allows you to be about the resources and the spreadsheets, but then it also allows you to bring in the glitz and the glam and the drama and the flair and, the ooh, the ah factor. I love that. I love that a lot. And you stay on budget. So that's like you would do really, really well in like interior design or event planning. Let's see. North Node in Aquarius, ruled by Saturn. Yeah, again, back to the event planning aspect. Like, I would highly, highly encourage you to do some sort of community involvement, some sort of philanthropic effort, some sort of event planning, because Saturn ruling your North Node in the 11th house of friendships and social groups from the 10th house of fame. Like, there's a lot of really good markers in the charts to bring forward positive attention. Yeah. But that only happens when you start to get exposed to large groups of people, you know. Fifth house of children and parenting can be a little bit of an energy suck, but you've got the energy to deal with it, so that's perfectly fine. As well as Mars and Aries ruling the chart, swift mind in Virgo. You know how to make things efficient. You know how to find the workarounds. You're constantly researching the DIY hacks. So I don't worry about that South Node influence at all. You want to know about family, you want to know about relationship stuff, so let's go ahead and talk about that. Yeah, again, working with spaces, working with families, working with events. Like, it would just be so good for you with that moon in the sixth house of work ruling the fourth house of family. I love it. Even working in the family business when you were younger, all appropriate expressions of your chart. Venus in the fifth house of children and sexuality ruling the seventh house of relationships is glorious. I really do enjoy that because it's attracting not just a beautiful spouse, Yeah, because a Libra spouse or a spouse with a Libra influence is just going to be very aesthetically pleasing. Great Facebook photos. You know, it's just going to be just selfie central with how lovely a couple you will make. But it's also triggering a lot of your child and parenting aspects. So I think that that's a good kind of chemistry and synastry. You know, you'll naturally be attracted to somebody who can't make a decision to save their life, but that's what you're for. Somebody who looks pretty on paper, somebody who is actually a very, very good parent, somebody who has some really, really good parenting skills, always very, very attractive to you. But also somebody who's creative, somebody who knows how to manage their energy properly, somebody who's always playing devil's advocate. You know, it's a good balance, a good match. Hmm. Because Mars is ruling this eighth house of death and business and taxes and estates, and we also have Pluto and Scorpio here in the eighth house being ruled by that Mars, who is by sign opposing it. Um, there's going to be some interesting things that happen around 50. As that Pluto starts to mature and that eighth house starts to ripen, I think a lot more of the financial aspects, a lot more of the investment aspects will start to come forward. So now would be like as things start to unfold in your chart, and as time starts to take its hold in your chart and starts to ripen your chart, I think that one of the things that you'll need to focus a little bit more on in the future is investment and using other people's money, using leverage, the power of loans, the power of interest to your advantage. Excellent. Thank you, Samantha, for donating your chart. That will be all for today. We've got one more chart, but Uriam on Instagram just asked where you can send your chart. So if you're interested in being in the live stream, private message me your birth date, your birthplace, your exact birth time, and I will add you to the list. The list is long. Please be patient, but I will private message you back when your chart is featured. Let's go ahead. We've got one more chart to look at. And it's not Samantha, it's Steph. Yep. So we've got Steph as our last chart. Whoop, my mouse is going all over the place. Okay. Good morning, Steph. How are you? How are you? Cheers. Let's take a peek at your chart, shall we? Tricky, 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 tricky. Tricky, tricky, tricky. Okay, Steph, we've got a lot going on. We've got a lot going on. You've spread yourself out pretty thin. There are a lot of things that you could focus on that, but not all of them require your attention. So we're going to try to sort them out in terms of priority, and I might need to kind of just babble for a second in order to get a good handle on the chart. So the first thing that strikes me about the chart is the ascendant. The ascendant is in Sagittarius, which gives you that mutable fire energy. It makes you charismatic. It makes you funny. It gives you that kind of foolish quality of the seeker. Not necessarily foolish being a bad thing, but just that kind of carefree, happy-go-lucky Sagittarius energy, or at least it would. Or at least it would. If you didn't have Saturn right on the ascendant. So you have Saturn in Sagittarius at 4 degrees conjoining the ascendant. That's a pretty strong placement. That's a pretty deliberate placement as well. You putting Saturn, the Lord of Restriction, on your ascendant really does give me pause. Because from a medical perspective, we look at Sagittarius, the sign of the liver, the hips, the vessels, and we see Saturn, the Lord of Restriction, and that'll produce some pretty intense restriction and underdevelopment in the liver, some issues in the hips with bursitis, as well as some circulatory issues with the blood vessels. Uranus here also medically not necessarily super great with liver, hips, and vessels because Uranus is the planet of unpredictability, and we might have some vascular issues that are electric in nature as well. But if you do not take care of your health, if you do not nourish the liver, if you do not, if you lose control of your blood sugar, you might find Raynaud's being one of the symptoms that manifests, especially because Taurus is on the 6th house with metabolism. Yeah, food is definitely one of the things that I would highly, highly encourage you to work on medicinally. The Lord of your chart is Jupiter in Pisces retrograde in the 4th house of family. I do love that, actually, because Jupiter is in his proper sign of Pisces. That's a strong Jupiter. Although Jupiter is retrograde, it's still a Jupiter-ruled chart. So it offsets that Saturn rather nicely. So there's going to be a lot of strength in family. There's going to be a lot of strength in intimate connection. There's going to be a lot of strength in the bloodline. Although it's not necessarily perfect, the people who you were born into, the family that you were born into, will provide a certain amount of prosperity and grace in your chart specifically. Finance won't necessarily be a problem, but it is going to be a major factor in the life. We have an exalted Mars here, so Mars in Capricorn does indicate a good head of spending. Mars is normally an impulsive planet, but in the cardinal Earth sign of Capricorn, it does temper that haste a lot. We also have Neptune in Capricorn as well, so the idea of losing track of money is never going to be an issue, really. There will always be kind of guardrails put up to prevent monetary loss, which I enjoy. That's also one of the gifts of Saturn. Like, Saturn does boundaries really well, and Sagittarius doesn't necessarily do boundaries very well. So, although we'll get to Virgo in a second, but the idea of if you had Sagittarius with other placements that were more fiery, less restrictive, that might work against you. But instead, you actually have some really nice boundaries in place to keep that fiery energy controlled and contained. Now let's move to your sun. So we have the sun in Virgo applying to conjoin with the MC. MC at 20 degrees, sun at 22 degrees. So the MC is moving towards that sun in the 10th house of success. That is a very forward placement that you've decided to put on your chart. Again, everything about your chart just seems so deliberate, so specific. And, you know, Virgo is the sign of organization. It's the sign of putting things exactly where they need to be. So I enjoy a good alignment when I see one. The sun in the 10th with the MC being present, the midheaven, the highest point of the chart. This is where you get your drive for success. This is where you get your kind of need to achieve, your need to perform. But because Saturn is also here co-present on the ascendant, I think that you have a realistic expectation of what is achievable and what is not achievable, and you know when to cut your losses. Whereas unchecked, I think this Virgo might actually get you in trouble, but you do have the nice kind of checks and balances in place in this chart. Mercury and Libra in the 11th, you know, one of the things that you'll find is you naturally attract peacekeeping friends who are always kind of straddling both sides of the fence, friends who are never really picking a side, but who are always just generally pleasant to be around. It's not necessarily super helpful, but it's not really bad. But instead, one of the things that you find yourself constantly doing is consoling them and counseling them. So just remember that you are not supposed to be the person that people go to on a regular basis to ask for advice. Like, that's not a friendship. That's in some ways a client relationship, yeah. But we have some issue with that if that's the only kind of friends that you make. So just be aware of that. Let's share. Now we start to unpack the difficulty in the chart. And the difficulty in the chart comes through with a Venus in Scorpio. Co-present just 1 degree away from Pluto in Scorpio. So there's some pretty heavy underworld energy in the chart that needs to be addressed. Venus also ruling the 6th house of work, health, and pets. So you being in the therapy industry, you being in and being familiar with the darker side of therapy. That's a very big kind of aspect of the chart. Now, Saturn on the ascendant, I can see why you did this. I can see, like, as we go through the chart, I can see why you gave yourself that rock. I can see why you gave yourself that sternness, that deliberation, that ability to set proper boundaries. Because the Venus needs it. Venus in Scorpio in the 12th at her worst is the Medusa. She is the Gorgon in the cave that is waiting, that is guarding the treasure, and that is a very dark and a very scary place to put a Venus in Scorpio, but it's also a very therapeutic place to put her, because we know the monster, yeah, and we know the monster is there, so we can prepare, yeah. It's one of the things where the 12th house doesn't seek you out. The 12th house is always a place that you approach with intention. Yeah, sometimes we're swallowed up by it due to life circumstance if we're not listening enough. But if you're listening and you're paying attention to cues, the 12th house is a place that you receive an invitation to. It's a place that you go with intention in order to do work on yourself. And for you to put Venus, goddess of love and affection, in Scorpio, that kind of Persephone energy, yeah, coming forward in the 12th house of karmic healing, but also hidden enemies, jails, hospitals, ruling your 6th house of work. There's a strong therapy slant to the chart, which is another theme that we're seeing this morning. Moon in Aquarius also ruled by Saturn in the 1st. I think you're a natural born teacher. I think, teaching, writing, speaking come very, very easily to you, very, very naturally to you. It's not something that you necessarily need to work on. It's just you give great advice. Now we just need to work on monetizing that advice, because that third house moon is ruling the 8th house of business. You would do very well in private practice. You would do very well as a consultant. So I would highly suggest you at least have a small LLC on the side for people who want to pay you for your 2 cents. Yeah, I think that would be an excellent revenue source for you. I also think it would be an excellent opportunity for you to exercise your skills, regardless of what your day job is. But we do need to address that Venus. We do need to work with her a little bit more in depth. We do need to honor that Virgo sun in the 10th, where we find success and fame and the being thrown in the spotlight and seeking attention as part of the ego's nourishment, which is a part of any human experience. And then also remembering that when in doubt, retreat back into family, retreat back into your strength, where things are easy, where things are effortless, where things have a natural sense of grace and replenishment. Naturally, when it comes to relationships, you're attracted to somebody who's very windy, who's very intellectual, who is very curious, who is very much the embodiment of Mercury. Somebody who flits and flies and speaks very fast and very quickly, and who is both interested and interesting and creative, but also can be a little bit verbose, can be a little bit bipolar at times, as Mercury and Gemini tend to flit from one extreme to the other. But that's what keeps things interesting, and that's also what keeps you from being too stuck, too grounded in that Saturn on the ascendant. Cool. Okay, Steph, thank you so much for donating your chart to the live stream. I very, very much appreciate it. Cool. And that is it, everybody. Thank you for joining me. Thank you for joining me for another round of the Astro-Babble. We are going to be going live on Friday as well. If you would like to donate your charts to the queue, feel free to private message me your birth date, your birthplace, your exact birth time. I will add you to the list. The list is long. Please be patient. But I will message you when your chart is featured to make sure you know when to look for it. Also, if you would like to work privately, if you would like to learn astrology, you can always go to my website, scorpiorisingastrology.com, for info on scheduling private consults as well as online classes. Speaking of online classes, I just dropped my Planetary Altars class, which is a remediation class. It's for all levels to help understand your natal charts, to help understand what it means to be disconnected from the virtues of the planets and how to repair those bonds. So we'll be going through how to remediate all 7 of the personal planets: Moon, Sun, Mercury, Mars, Venus, Saturn, Jupiter, and really kind of delving into how to use astrology practically. Anyway, That is it for today. Thank you so much for watching. Until next time, may the stars be ever in your favor.